Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome back to my channel Think Big Learn Smart, and I am back with another video after a very long time. So today the topic of my discussion is game theory in international relations, and we will discuss about this theory in terms of international relations and its applications as well. So the factors that we will discuss about the game theory in this lecture are of its history and what are the basic assumptions of game theory in predicting the behavior of states as well as players, what are the basic types of game theories. We will discuss two basic types of game theories, and then we will also discuss the most famous models of game theory for predicting the behavior of states, the game of chicken and the prisoner's dilemma. And in the last but not the least, we will discuss about the limitations of game theory in predicting the behavior of these states. So without further ado, let's move on. First, we will start with the basic introduction of the game theory. What is game theory? Game theory is a branch of applied mathematics that is used for predicting the behavior of players, and it involves the analysis of strategies for in the situation of conflict or in situation of competitive situations, as well as in which participants have to think critically and choose the best option for themselves. So it is also, we can also say that it is a mathematics of decision making or the science of strategy. As I have said in this last point as well, prediction of steps and strategies used by groups and individuals in a conflict situation. So that is all about the game theory, and it is most notably used in economics, biology, engineering, political science, international relations, computer science, philosophy. These are all the applications of game theory. Basically, it is a part of mathematics, applied mathematics, and the international relations and its uses in economics and biology, they are all the applications of game theory. So let's move on. We will also discuss the basic history of game theory, and I'm not going to go in the nitty-gritty of the history of game theory. I will just describe the key points and we will move on towards next slide. So it was discovered by von Neumann in his key paper that he wrote in 1928. In it, he discusses about the game theory, and then in 1944, the theory of games and economic behavior, the book came into the market, which was written by von Neumann by himself and Morgenstern. Then in 1950, Nash invents Nash equilibrium, and after that, the game theory booms, because then international thinkers started using game theory in predicting the behavior of international states, and its uses started to get more and more involved in every field of science. So it boomed after the 1950s, and in 1994, then Hassane, Nash and Salton wins Nobel Prize in economics for the game theory work. So that was all about the game theory's basic history. Let's move on. Now we are going to discuss about the assumptions of the game theory. There are a few assumptions that are made in the game theory, and we will discuss about these assumptions. There are at least 2 players must be involved in any game at minimum for the game to be played, and there can be more players, but at least 2 players are must for any game to be played. And here the word player is used in a special sense. Player means a decision maker or a person that will take a decision in a conflict situation or in a strategic environment. Then another assumption of the game theory is that In every game there is a strategy, and it is decided by the player of the game. So what is a strategy? A strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve a long-term aim, or to get a certain outcome from the game. And it is also assumed that the players of the game are guided by rationality, means they act rationally. They weigh all the options and their pros and cons. Then they take a rational decision in which the maximum benefit they can get and the maximum payoff or the maximum outcome that they can get from various options available. In the game, certain amount of uncertainty is involved. There is a certain kind of dilemma involved in, and the decision is needed to be taken into account various factors which are involved, and by taking various factors into consideration, we have to take the decision that is most suitable for a player. Now let's discuss about the types of game theory, and in this lecture I'm going to discuss about the two basic types of game theory. One is a zero-sum games and the other one is the variable sum game, which will come after this slide. So let's start our discussion about the zero-sum games. Zero-sum game is a very simple game played between two persons or groups or an individual. Chess, bridge, poker fall into this category, in which the one person is a winner and the other one is a loser. The gain of one person means the loss of another, and the very famous example of it is in the international relation context is of the Cold War era. There was fight on all fronts between Soviet Union and US. There was an ideological conflict between these two camps. One promoted the capitalistic mindset and the other promoted the communism mindset. And they were in continuous rivalry in the Cold War era that ensued after the Second World War, after 1945, and went till the demise or the demolition of Soviet Union. It was by all means a zero-sum game, in which if one party gained an extra benefit, the other party considered it as their a loss, or there was surely a loss involved between the other camp. For example, Soviet Union were the first one to send their person to the space, and the US felt it as their loss, and they went into a space race. And then, as we all know, they sent the first person to the moon, and there was also the rivalry between these two countries regarding weapons creation. They were creating massive weapons, massive nuclear weapons, and there was an arms race between these two countries, and it was by all means a zero-sum game. If one was winning, the other was losing. If one camp was getting stronger, the other camp was automatically incurring loss by that gain. So from that example you can get the basic idea of zero-sum game, and it is called as zero-sum because if one party gains 100 points, then other loses 100 points, and the overall sum is always zero. That's why it is also called as zero-sum game. So that was all about zero-sum games. Let's start moving towards the variable sum game. VariableSum Games, narrated by Carl Dutesque in his The Analysis of International Relations. This type of variable-sum games, Dutesque says that the majority of the games fall in the category of zero-sum games, but in the actual environment in the actual strategic environment of international relations and about the relations of the states, there is a variable sum going on. There is a no shore winner or a no shore loser in the international arena, and there that it is possible that both sides may gain, and it is also known as a positive sum game, which is a variation of variable sum game. And it is also possible that both sides may lose, and by different amounts to a different degree as well. So there is a variable sum involved. Now there is no sure person that completely gains, or there is a no sure person that completely loses everything, or a player that completely loses the game. So there is a variable sum involved. Either both parties can gain from cooperating, or they can also lose as well by different amounts, or by different degree, or by equal amounts as well. So there is a variable sum involved in both these games. So we will discuss about the variable sum games in the upcoming slides, in which I am going to discuss about the prisoner's dilemma and the game of chicken. They are both the examples of the variable sum games. So let's move on. Let's start our discussion about the game of chicken, and it is a very beautiful example of a zero sum game that we discussed in the previous slide. And game of chicken is also known as a hawk and dove game or the snowdrift game. So let's start discussion about this particular game. And in this particular, for understanding this particular game of chicken, we have to create a scenario in which two players are in conflict with each other, and they both are in their cars and moving towards each other with a considerable pace. And if they collide with each other, they both are not going to survive. So what happens in this conflictive situation is that they both individuals try to avoid yielding, or try to avoid being called as a chicken if they back off. So each player taunts the other to increase the risk of shame in yielding. And what motivates them in this conflict situation to kill each other, or to move towards such a brinkmanship that they both are not going to survive, is that if one of them backs off, there is an ideal outcome waiting for one player, which is that he will be the victor and the other one will be the chicken who is the loser. So conflict can be avoided if they both cooperate with each other, but that won't be the game of chicken. There won't be any game of chicken. So there is a conflict, and everyone wants to get the maximum payoff that it can get in this strategic environment. So there is a very beautiful example of it in the history, like the mutual assured destruction example of the Cuban Missile Crisis that happened in the Cold War era. In 1962, what happened was that US placed its nuclear warfare in the Cuban island to threaten US, and there was a 13-day standoff between these two nuclear states, and there was a nuclear brinkmanship involved. And if they both have started war at that time, there was mutually assured destruction completely there for both of these players. But what happened was that the game of chicken was not the game of chicken didn't happen. They both cooperated with each other and backed off from this nuclear warfare, and it was a beautiful example of the game of chicken. Now let's move on towards another model, prisoner's dilemma, the most oldest model of game theory, and its solution concept is also the simplest. So what happens in the prisoner's dilemma is that there are two thieves. We are going to understand this dilemma with an example. There are two thieves plan to rob an electronics store. As they approach the back door, police arrest them for trespassing, but the cops know that they were trying to rob the electronics store, but the lack of evidence to support such an accusation makes them to create such a dilemma for prisoners to confess themselves. So they therefore require a confession to charge the suspect with greater crime, and the confession can only come from the prisoners. So the interrogator throws them into prisoner's dilemma. So how an interrogator throws them into prisoner's dilemma is that interrogator gives first of all, interrogator separates both of the prisoners in the separate rooms. Then he gave the first prisoner 4 options, and the 4 options are that if you confess, your partner keeps quiet, you will go free, but your partner will go to jail on robbery charges for 12 months. He gives them an opportunity to go free by confessing about the crime that they were both planning to rob the electronics store. Then another option that he gives to the prisoner is that if your partner confesses and you keep quiet, you will go to jail for 12 months and your partner will go free. So if the other one confesses, you will go to jail for 12 months. And the third option is that if you both confess and point finger at each other, you both will go to jail for 8 months. And option 4 is if you both keep quiet, both will be only charged with trespassing for 1 month only. So how the prisoner is going to approach this dilemma that is being created here, and the same options are given to the second prisoner as well. Now let's create a payoff matrix in this regards. A payoff matrix is a matrix which is going to show that what type of option can get them the maximum benefit from this strategic interdependent situation. To understand more about the prisoner's dilemma, we are going to create a payoff matrix in which we are going to list the options of both prisoners and how they are going to get the maximum utility or the maximum payoff in this scenario. So for the prisoner 1, there are 2 options. Either he can be quiet and don't confess, or he can confess. So there are 2 options for the prisoner 1. So if he keeps quiet and the prisoner 2 keeps quiet as well, they are both going to go to jail for 1 month and for the only charge of trespassing. But if he keeps quiet and the other prisoner confesses, then what is going to happen? Prisoner 1 is going to go to jail for 12 months. Well, I am explaining this payoff matrix in terms of prisoner 1's thinking. So if he keeps quiet, he will either get 1 month's prison depending on the trust of his partner, or if the other one confesses on his back, then he is going to go to jail for 12 months. So what will be his thinking in this? He will be thinking about his own benefit, and as we know that the players are selfish and they want a maximum benefit. So what he is going to do is that he is going to confess. So if he is going to confess, what are the options for him? Either he will get free if other prisoner don't confess, or even if the other prisoner confesses, he is going to go to jail for 8 months. So the best option for the prisoner 1 would be to confess, and similar options are available for the prisoner too. And if there is a lack of trust between these both prisoners, and they are both looking for their own benefit, for their own selfish needs, then they both are going to confess to get away from the charges. But what happens is that they both are looking for their own benefit, and they both are taking a rational decision in this conflict situation. But what is happening really is that they are getting the maximum loss here. If they both had kept quiet, they both had only been charged with trespassing charges. So that there was a dilemma involved here, prisoner's dilemma. So that was all about the prisoner's dilemma. Let's move on towards the limitation of game theory. Are people really rational and intelligent in most situations? No. There is an emotional aspect involved as well, and people don't always weigh all options rationally. They don't think about what option is going to give them the maximum payoff. Sometimes leaders take irrational decisions without thinking any further how that decision is going to impact them in the future. So people are not really always rational and intelligent in the real world scenarios. And how can we measure payoffs in a meaningful way, as there are different meaning of payoff for different peoples. For example, 1 year prison might seem different to a young man whose wife has just given birth to a baby than it does to a 40-year-old man who has no family. So payoff is a subjective concept, and it differs from person to person how it is going to affect a certain player or a certain person. Does either the strategic form or the extensive form really represent how decisions are made? How often does collective decision making evolve without communication or with sequential communication? Then there is another limitation of game theory. Most game theory models limit the number of players to 2 or 3. But if we think about the real world scenario, there are multiple players involved in the game, and how their presence will change the scenario and the decision making of the existing players is a difficult thing to model in the game theory. So these are the few limitations of game theory, and that was all about our today's lecture. So I hope you enjoyed it. So if you liked this lecture, then please like, comment and share and subscribe as well. Thank you very much for your time. Allah Hafiz.